Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Scott Jacobson. Scott is a managing director at Madrona Venture Group, where he has spent the past 14 plus years helping early stage technology entrepreneurs in the Pacific Northwest build and scale their companies. Scott is on the boards of companies like Rover, Flex, and Commerce IQ, and focuses much of his energy on consumer businesses or business technologies that have a significant consumer component. Prior to joining Madrona, Scott worked at Amazon, where he did 2 tours of duty, leading product management for Amazon's third-party seller platform and working on the launch of the original Kindle. Welcome, Scott. Good to see you.
Thanks, Shauna. Great to see you.
Okay, so I'm hitting you with rapid fire. What's your biggest pet peeve?
Well, I don't really have pet peeves. Karen's biggest pet peeve is like lip smacking, which I probably do. So I'd say my biggest contribution to pet peeves is, making noises.
That's funny. Like chewing gum loudly kind of thing?
Yeah, or breathing or, all those things.
God forbid you breathe. That's how you know you've been together breathing. A long time. You're like, God, I can hear him breathe.
Yeah, I'm more of a creator of pet peeves than a sufferer of one.
That's hilarious. What are 3 words that your 3 amazing boys would use to describe you as a dad?
Fun, I hope. Stern, probably they would say, although I would disagree with that. And dad.
Oh, I love that. Okay, Scott, what's your hidden talent?
My hidden talent. I'm great at washing dishes. I know a lot of people wouldn't necessarily believe that about me, but when Karen and I were in our first house, and it was just the 2 of us, that was my job, dishwasher.
So you load the dishwasher well?
Wash dishes. I've had every job you can think of from when I was a kid. Folding clothes. Delivering newspapers. Like I like the working with my hands kind of stuff, which as a guy in tech and stuff. Or probably maybe people wouldn't imagine.
Yeah. Well, you can do that on your side jobs. Okay. Which sport would you love to compete in if you were in the Olympics?
The Olympics. I love teams that are not supposed to win who win. So even though I'm not like an ice hockey player, the Americans beating Canadians, like some, the underdogs. I'm a big underdog fan. So any sport in which the Americans are usually the losers and come back and prevail.
But you're going to be the athlete in it. So what sport would you have fun doing?
If it's an Olympic sport, I don't know. Maybe throwing a javelin or shot put, something like that.
Nice. And if you could teleport anywhere right now, where would you go and with who?
Somewhere sunny because it is raining outside. It would definitely be with my wife. I would say maybe Hawaii, somewhere sunny and warm. Maybe the kids, the dog if she's lucky.
Are you into the dog?
I am. Yeah, I'm super into the dog. I never had a dog before, and we now have a COVID puppy, and she's great. Great for the family.
She's the cutest dog ever. I saw Karen right after you got the dog, and Karen was like not into getting a dog. And I saw her; she was like a deer in headlights. I'm not a dog person, and now of course she's attached. That's just what happens.
Yeah, she's been great for our family.
That's always what happens. Yeah, I love it. Okay, so I know you're from Deerfield, Illinois. Tell me about Deerfield. I've never been there. I've been to Chicago.
It's
only once.
Yeah, it's a suburb. It's called the North Shore. It's a suburb of Chicago. It's a very, it's just sort of a nice, easy place to grow up. Kind of like Seattle in that everybody's friendly. You can ride your bike at any time of the day. I don't know if everybody left their doors unlocked and the cars unlocked, but it was definitely a safe and fun place to be. And we lived there most of my life, a couple of years on the East Coast, but that was until I met my wife. That was kind of all of geographically where I've been.
Yeah. And did you think that you were going to end up there? Like if you hadn't met Karen, is that a place that you would want to raise your kids?
I love Chicago in late spring and in the fall and in the early summer.
It's like New York.
I don't love the, wind chill off the lake. I don't love the humidity. And so I probably would have ended up in California. I think, I went to grad school down there and I probably would have stayed if I didn't have a reason to come up here, but super glad that I did.
Yeah. And did you go to private or public school?
Public. great public schools.
Were you all the, interesting, like all of the schools in that area are good?
Certainly where we lived, yeah.
And were you into school? Obviously, you attend Northwestern, so you had to be pretty good in school, but was school kind of something that came easy for you?
Yeah, I feel like I wouldn't say I peaked, but like, I sort of became more serious about school as I continued to do school. So I don't know that I took it too seriously in sort of high school, and then college a bit more. And then by the time when I got to grad school, when I should have actually not really cared about it, I was probably did the best that I'd done all through the way. But I always enjoyed school. To me, it's more about learning ways of thinking, and versus learning specific things. I think a lot of people, you can get a lot of knowledge from reading books, and I like to read. But learning ways to think is, at least for me, what I got the most out of school.
Yeah. What kinds of things do you read? Are you reading a lot right now, like these days?
I try to, but with 3 kids and a job and a half, and and a dog, and a wife, that's harder. Probably more, like I would imagine a lot of people, books on tapes, podcasts, etc. Just because when I'm driving or working out or whatever, you can kind of enjoy that. And it's everything from things that are relevant to what I do, technology, entrepreneurship, startups, to like for fun, it's like sci-fi. I'm still a little bit more into just kind of turn your brain off and go use your imagination.
The brain candy stuff. Is there anything that you've listened to or read or seen in the past year that you find yourself like continually recommending?
That's a good question. There's a few podcasts that I really enjoy. I mean, reading wise, I like people. This is less books and more sort of journalism or publishing, but I really prefer the people who go deep. So like in my things that I read, like The Information is an example of a kind of a tech blog that does kind of deep and not kind of the fluffy clickbait listicle type of stuff. Ben Thompson, Stratechery, I don't know if you read that blog, but he's super deep and kind of a deep thinker. Invest Like the Best is a podcast that where his name's escaping me, but the host, who's great, just has some really interesting people. I like to listen to, I like people's stories. I'm sure it's kind of part of why you did this podcast.
Oh my God. It's like, I'm obsessed with people's stories. And as I get to hear them all, this was like what drove me to start this. I'm like, I get access to really interesting, cool people. And sometimes I'm like, it would be so cool for other people to hear this. And whether it's if it's a CEO or if it's an investor, and people are just have this impression or they're kind of intimidated. And then you're like, this is just a cool person who loves Run DMC.
Yeah, so I enjoy that.
Have you listened to Working Backward, the Amazon story?
So you mean the book that Bill Carr and so I know, so we actually had Colin and Bill. So Colin's wife Sarah and I used to work together, but like way back in the day at Amazon, and we kind of knew each other peripherally. And then I worked with Bill as well in 2 different kind of part Amazon, and so I know them quite well. And so actually when they first published the book, we had Bill and Colin in to present all, kind of to do a little bit of like a book discussion with all of our CEOs.
Oh, that's I'm enjoying it. I'm just listening to it right now. I always have like 3 or 4 going at the same time. But anyway. Yeah,
I read an early copy. I mean, I quite enjoyed my time there and learned a lot, that's sort of consistent with what they talk about. So I actually love the book. And I think they're both terrific people.
Yeah. And I know that you've described your dad. There's a lot on you online, by the way. Some people, you can't find anything. I'm like, you've been interviewed a lot. So I got scoop. I know your dad influenced your interest in technology, and also that he gave you some great advice. I'm reading what I read, which is awesome. It says the most important thing to do what you love and work with people that you respect, and everything else will work itself out. I'm reading this because I'm just going to take your dad and be like, cut, paste for my own kids. But I think it's just awesome advice. So how old were you? Was this like when you were in college or when you were little or like lately?
Well, I'll kind of share a slightly different anecdote, which is, my dad was an engineer. He worked at Bell Labs in Chicago, and, Bell Labs was sort of like, what became part of AT&T is kind of a cool research thing. And that took us out to New Jersey for a couple of years. But he ultimately did an MBA at the University of Chicago, super smart guy. He went to Northwestern undergrad. That's the only reason he and my mom, it's the only reason I got in.
Okay.
And so he did that. He went to Northwestern, got like an engineering degree, worked at Bell Labs, for a bunch of time, got an MBA at the University of Chicago and became, moved into management. And he really liked managing people. He liked doing engineering stuff and, being a leader in, as I'll call an individual contributor as opposed to like a people leader. And, for a lot of people, if you invest in an education like that, and B, just from sort of like an ego perspective, I think it's natural to say, hey, I'm going to make, career advancements or, compensation advancements or whatever that are associated with like people leadership as opposed to kind of product leadership. And, he decided he didn't want to do that because what he loved was, the hands-on building. And I was really, I don't know if he ever talked to me about it, but I sort of got to observe it. I always really appreciate that. It's like, hey, if you do what you love, what fires you up and you do it with people you like, everything else will work itself out. It's not always about optimizing for title or span of control or compensation or what have you. So that we maybe have talked about it. I'm sure we did. But I was really just respected that and continue to respect that.
Yeah. And what about your interest in investing? Was that something that you kind of honed in on as a kid or just later in life?
I had not intended to be a venture capitalist. And I don't think of myself per se as an investor. My partner, Tim Porter, who, he and I were classmates in grad school. And I went to Amazon to build stuff, and he went to Microsoft and was in corporate development and strategy. And I was working on the original Kindle, and that was about to launch. And I thought, hey, it'd be cool to try to build stuff, outside of this great platform. Learned an amazing amount of things at Amazon, but it's hard to know if you're any good when you've got the power of that platform. Like if you didn't have it. And so I called Tim, and he had just joined Madrona, and I said, hey, you guys see all the cool companies in town, and I think it'd be interesting to join a startup. Can you make some introductions? And so he did, and he said, hey, it's and I had been transparent with the folks that I work with that I was going to kind of look at what was next for me, including outside of Amazon, and they're very supportive of that. And so he also asked me to look at a company that they were, an e-commerce related thing that they were looking at. So I gave him some input. And then it was just sort of serendipitous. There was a person at Madrona who left to go join a later stage fund down in, I think, San Diego, and they needed a backfill.
Oh, and, that's crazy. I've never heard that story. You're like, and here I am 14 years later.
Yeah. So we kind of had this kind of bidirectional agreement where, even though I was interested in startups, it's not worth, a firm hiring you for 6 months and then, you disappear. And right. So, and likewise, I didn't know investing was for me. And so we sort of made a 2-year commitment to each other. And, I actually thought it'd be a great opportunity, even if I was going to join a startup, just to learn.
Totally. Well, being on the other side, how to raise funds, all of it, just that's an incredible way. And you also have an awesome foundation. Working in New York for so long, recruiting for alternative asset companies, there is that kind of strong college, obviously, with Northwestern. And then you've got your consulting background with Accenture, which I'm sure somewhat equipped you with some skills, right? For investing and just looking at companies through a different lens. I feel like people with investment banking and consulting experience have a really good foundation for kind of anything from there.
Yeah, we do hire a lot of young folks that oftentimes have banking and consulting backgrounds, and as you mentioned, I did. I think there's a few reasons that people kind of work well who come from that context. One is there's getting up to speed quickly, new opportunities, new industries, new categories, doing a lot of the legwork. That's what analysts at investment banking firms and analysts at consulting companies and strategy often do, right? So they context switch, They have to learn quickly. They have to become relatively expert, by gathering data and talking to people, synthesizing that and having points of view. And then, there's certainly the modeling aspect of what we do, which is a little more art than science or at the very early stages. How much capital is a company going to need?
Right.
What milestones do they need to achieve? But in the later stages, after we've made investments and companies made progress, like how do you value a company and how do you think about, exit values and other things? That helps to be able to manage a spreadsheet,
Totally.
and build models and all that sort of stuff. And people with those backgrounds tend to be quite good at that too.
Yeah, and you've got that experience. So if you hadn't gotten into Stanford, because obviously people ask me, and I'm like, I don't have an MBA, but people do ask like what my opinion is as far as building their resume with an MBA. And I always say if it's a recognizable, like kind of like, holy shit, you went to Stanford or Harvard or one of the top schools, yes. But what's your advice around getting an MBA, and how did that experience prepare you or not for your career? Obviously great network, the alumni network, but how else has it prepared you?
So when I was later in my consulting career, which was not very long, I got to work with some technology companies in the late 90s in the Bay Area. And, that was a pretty exciting time for tech and the internet boom. And that was kind of what gave me the tech bug. And, I wanted a context switch out of consulting. The strategy and learning about stuff is really exciting. The not getting to implement anything or owning decision making was less fulfilling for me. And so I said, okay, well, I want a context switch. I don't know what I'm qualified to do as a consultant if I'm going to jump into an operating role. And so business school is kind of a natural break, where you sort of get to, learn and experiment and be curious, but then, people hire out of there. Right. And so it's sort of a natural place to go learn a set of skills and then go into something new. I sort of wondered if it'd be interesting to be an entrepreneur, when I went to grad school. And it was an interesting time because this was 2001. And so,
the world was falling
a lot
apart,
of things didn't work out. And a lot of my classmates were people who'd started their own companies. And so I kind of came out of there thinking, well, gosh, it'd be great to learn on somebody else's dime. Learned about how to think about, again, like frameworks for thinking, how to get up, to speed quickly on new things, but I didn't really have any operating experience. And so I interned at Amazon between my 2 years of business school and then, felt like that would be a great next step to really build skills as a builder.
Such a good experience. So how many people were there at the time? It was early. I mean, not early days, but pretty early.
At Amazon?
Yeah.
I don't know. It was probably 7,000 or 8,000 in Seattle. Yeah. So it was not,
it's not crazy.
It was not,
but so much smaller than now.
Yeah.
And obviously
there's
been so many articles and studies around Amazon and Jeff Bezos, and people have kind of this fascination. I don't know what my opinion is as far as like, would I have been successful there, working there? Part of me is like, well, of course I would, based on how people have described it. What, I guess, if you were to start a company today, what would you take from your experience as far as the culture there? And what would you leave behind? Because we work with a ton of spin outs of Amazon, and, they've implemented a lot of the same things around recruiting, the way that they look at recruiting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that one, I'd say there's a few kind of key things. The customer centricity element and focus on customers, not competitors, that to me is sort of the golden rule. And, I certainly think about that with all of the companies that I have the opportunity to work with. And I think it's hard to argue against that. And yet there's very few companies in the world who are as customer centric, who are at all customer centric, let alone as customer centric as that company has been. And I do believe in the bar raiser approach, right? Which is, at Amazon, the hiring manager isn't necessarily the ultimate decider, or at least there's somebody else with a veto power. And that's very helpful, I think, in the context of, you've got a real pain point that you need to solve, but, we need to make sure that we're raising the bar for the company. And in a company like that, which I actually really believe in for any company where it's easy to move from one part of the organization to the next, and they actually, promote that, foster that, so people can grow and build different skills. It's really important, right? Because if you don't hire somebody who meets or exceeds the bar, and that may be your problem as the hiring manager, but then that becomes somebody else's problem if they move into a different group. And so I think that, sort of data driven, or at least data informed decision making, that really resonates with me. I'm a quant. And so data is not everything. And there's a CEO I work with of a non-tech, completely non-tech company. And I forget what he says, but it's like no data without stories, and no stories without data.
Yeah.
You really have to understand the customer experience, in addition to just sort of, reading, what the math says. But, again, there's a lot of companies that don't take a data driven approach to decision making. And that's something that really resonates with me.
But it almost feels ridiculous to not use data, because we have access, even anything. I mean, I know you're big, I've got my Fitbit. I don't know if you've got that ring but if you can kind of just hack things through the data, or in our business, we're always looking at data, but it's not the whole story. But if you didn't look at it at all, something would be wrong. It's available to us for the first time in a significant way. So tell me about your contribution at Amazon. Is there something that you're like, I feel really proud of this, or I didn't quite get to complete what I started because this bug caught me, Tim Porter, that damn Tim Porter.
Well, I mean, most of my work on the marketplace, which was kind of the first, tour of duty, if you will, was on the backs of other folks. And so, I mean, there were some really neat things that were built, but it's hard to sort of look at those things again, lots of tailwinds, and say, was that compelling or wasn't it? The Kindle was neat just because it was new, and so, we were drafting off of our relationship with publishers. People knew, the content that we had, this huge customer base, but that was all new. I was responsible for a few different product related things, and these were all team efforts. So it's not like I was responsible for any one thing myself, but, we had one of the things I wrote was the spec for what's now called I think it's called KDP. It's basically the way that people can self-publish on Kindle.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it's like you would be surprised at least there's a couple of notable, very big, titles that were originally self-published. And so the nice thing about Amazon is, you can think about, I'm a big believer in, if you have the distribution platforms empowering creators, right? And not sort of concentrating power amongst the big, the record labels or the publishers or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so there's always, if you're the technology distribution platform, there's still that risk, right? The Apple App Store, the Google App Store, Amazon's, bookstore, et cetera. But, not having to go through intermediaries is, to me, a very powerful thing that technology enables. And so that was kind of a neat, again, that there are many contributors to that, but I got to work on that.
Yeah.
We had this science experiment, which was kind of neat. And the context at the time was a relatively small number of books were being put in ebook format, because 7-8 years ahead of that, there was the first generation of ebook readers, and they all failed. And so publishers had no interest in putting things in that format. And so one of the things that I also got to work on, Amazon had lots and lots of digitally scanned books. So, you could search inside the book, look inside the book. These were sort of features on the Amazon product detail page. You could see the table of contents, read a couple passages, kind of thing. And there was a team that turned those books, which are just basically a bunch of very high res pictures, right? And turn them into ebooks, which was not an easy task. Yeah. And so, I don't know that we sold a whole lot of them, but, early on selection. So Amazon is all about price, selection, and convenience. And selection, meaning how many books do you have? We're competing with Sony, who had actually used the same screen technology that we did with their reader. And one of the ways we were able to win is just by having better selection. And that was a contributor to that.
That sounds incredibly exciting, because it's something that you can say, actually, I can measure that. I left something there. That's very, very cool. If you were to sit with Jeff Bezos today, I guess, what do you think's in his mind as far as 3-5 years out? Some of the stuff that he's involved, that Amazon has done now. Even just going recently to the Kraken to Climate Pledge Arena, and just you're walking in and they know who it is, and you just walk out with your beer. Have you been since they've opened it? Amazon's whole technology around it. It's who would have thought that we're going to put books online, and now this is where we are. Where do you think Amazon's going to be 3, 5, even 10 years from now?
Yeah, well, I don't know how much time he's spending thinking about it anymore since, he's not the
Yeah, I know.
CEO,
And
but
okay, sit it with Andy Jassy.
yeah. It's a great question. I think there's some big assets that are being built, that aren't easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
So one example would be, Amazon is now the third largest deliverer of parcels, right? So behind FedEx and actually, sorry, I think behind UPS and USPS maybe, and I think they just surpassed FedEx. So, it used to be that Amazon delivered none of their packages, and now they deliver more than half, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, there's some of these assets that I think that company is particularly well suited to build are ones that are built off its scale,
Right. It's already
right? So they
there.
already have huge
Yeah.
scale, and so now how do we scale that up? And then you've seen some things that are bold bets, but where they don't have, like take drones as an example and drone delivery, where, there are factors out of their control, regulatory factors, the FAA, et cetera, that aren't necessarily going to allow them to do some of those things. I'm really interested to see what they'll do with autonomy. They bought a company called Zoox, which is an autonomous navigation, car navigation thing. They're big investors in Rivian, which is not an autonomous vehicle company; it's an electric vehicle company. But they have, and they ordered 100,000 electric Rivian, delivery vans.
I think it's going to be fascinating. Okay, so you framed it earlier when you were talking about Tim kind of giving you this like, okay, let's do this for 2 years. Let's see how it goes with Madrona.
Mm-hmm.
What were you looking at through what lens were you assessing the opportunity?
To be here. So, like I said, originally it was about what can I learn, and I just fell in love working with entrepreneurs. That was not something that I had the opportunity to do in my past lives. And, it was weird not building, to be candid. And I've had folks I used to work with at Amazon who are now entrepreneurs kind of remind me that I'm no longer an operator, builder.
I think it makes you a better investor though. Right?
Well, yeah, it's something I have a passion for and I enjoy doing and have some, kind of empathy for. But yeah, it's fun. One of the things I liked about consulting was being able to context switch. I was involved in a variety of companies, and I'm sort of, lifelong learner. That's one of the things I'm really passionate about. And so that's very attractive about this, and it's not just in the context of the entrepreneurs who you get to work with who are super fun, and just the opportunity to be a partner with the people. But also just you're effectively getting for real people to come and talk to you about what they think the future is going to be.
Totally.
And I can't think of very many, probably Jeff Bezos, when he was the CEO, had a lot of people doing that with him, for employees at Amazon and senior executives. And maybe, if you're the president of the United States or something like that, but there are very few jobs you could have where you actually get paid to do that. And so that, as a lifelong learner, that's super attractive to me.
Mm-hmm.
And, I like to build things too. And maybe we'll talk about that, but it's, I fell in love with learning and entrepreneurs.
And how was it kind of different than what you thought? Like, what did you picture yourself doing versus what it actually turned out to be? I guess people would have the idea that it's more of an analyst job versus realizing that at the end of the day, it's a people job. You're connecting. I mean, you're obviously doing analysis, but there's a whole lot of connecting that's happening that people I don't think are aware of when entrepreneurs are choosing which firms to partner with. They're thinking of like the value add of the venture partner that they're choosing. Like, how much contribution as far as the product are you going to be by my side? Like when the shit hits the fan, and then also like, how can you open up doors?
I think those are all important. I mean, I think different investors have different points of view about how and when they can add value. And frankly, some choose not to, very intentionally. There are firms you can raise capital from today who don't want to be on the board, want to get quarterly updates, and that's all good. And, sometimes that's attractive at a certain stage in the life of a company to an entrepreneur. But at the very early stage, I do think it's about the partnership, and about the chemistry and the personal chemistry, but also, having a shared vision, but not having a fixed mindset, because the reality is in these early stage companies, you may be directionally correct, but specifically wrong, to quote one of my partners. And you have to have a malleable view. and I think that's important for everybody. And so I really like entrepreneurs, and I think gravitate toward entrepreneurs who have a strong point of view of where things are going. But to quote Jeff Bezos, strong convictions loosely held. This is sort of like something that he would say often. And I think it's important to have a point of view, but it's also important to be able to synthesize information to learn and then be open to changing that point of view.
Yeah.
Not to get too political, but that's, I think, one of the great failings of our political system is, people go on writing X and then they have a really hard time ever saying anything different than X. But the reality is we all get more information, we all learn, and it's okay to change your mind.
Yeah. So you're now in your 8th fund at $345 million, the biggest fund yet, correct? How has the firm changed? And I guess what direction some of the OGs, right? The original founders are kind of passing the baton on to, I don't even think you'd be next gen, but kind of the middle gen.
Too old to be next gen.
Your middle gen.
Yeah.
But like, what direction do you think Madrona will be going in? And how do you kind of look at that as far as what you might miss about the early days?
Well, Tim and I and some others worked in the bullpen, or we called it the bullpen, but that I always really enjoyed the camaraderie of kind of being smushed together. And in fact, I asked him to share an office.
I was going to say, you did that by choice. Now you're there by choice. I've walked around there enough times to be like, and they're like, no, those guys are like bosom buddies. They want to be next to each other.
Yeah. No, he certainly, he was very gracious to accept I asked him if he wouldn't mind sharing an office. And so I really like the camaraderie. I mean, not just, the partnership with entrepreneurs, but also the partnership with our team and that close kind of, ability to work together. And I don't think that changes as the firm grows. I mean, the fund size can grow, the number of people can grow, but like we talked about at the beginning, it's the people that matter. Mm-hmm. And so, having, you can't have as a tight knit a group when there's 4 of you as when there's, 14 or 40. I mean, I'm sure you see this in your business.
Yeah.
And yet, really making sure that everybody, I think we have the same view, which is like everybody we bring in should be better than we are,
totally.
The next. And so I think Madrona has done a great job of that. I think, if you look at the people who've joined our ranks, both in, up and down the stack, they're, great, maybe upgrade's not the right term, but they're fabulous.
Yeah.
And I think it just makes for a better firm. From a strategy perspective, early stage, really formation stage investing is something that just really pulls at my heartstrings. And we talk about day one for the long run. We want to be there at the very early stages, but we want to help entrepreneurs through their whole journey. And one of the things that I think we used to do differently than we do now is when a company would go public, we would say, okay, well, that's kind of the end for us, right? But it's really just a financing milestone for the company. And so we've remained, involved on the boards for a longer period of time. And that's, I think, gratifying to us. I think it's good for the companies because we have that depth of relationship and understanding of the business. And it's oftentimes good for our investors too.
Yeah.
And as we've, kind of seen more of these movies all the way through the end, we built some skills in later stage investing or helping companies at the later stage continue to make those strategic decisions. And so we have, raised what we call an acceleration fund, which doesn't start at the very early stages, but sort of more at the VC or whatever language you want to use for these later stage
post
companies.
Kind of revenue traction. Yeah.
I mean, when I started, a $3 million round was called a Series A, and now it's called like a pre-seed.
Right.
Yeah, so
much money flying around.
Change.
I can't keep track of all that. So tell me about when you first, early days. What was your first kind of like, oh my gosh, I got this right? Your first good investment that you felt was kind of your baby that you brought in.
Actually, I'm going to answer a different question, which is like which one did I get wrong? Because I think there's it's always fun to talk about the exciting, wins, but I think it's harder. It's sometimes harder to
better
talk about
learnings to talk about the miss. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, one of the first, a guy named Dave Chappelle, who's not the comedian Dave Chappelle, but a former Amazonian, a good friend of mine, who was a Madrona entrepreneur, introduced me to an entrepreneur named Jeff Lawson. And Jeff was at AWS. He was an Amazonian. and he wanted to build, telephony as a web service, just like you have compute and storage and these other things. And company's called Twilio. And, he was based in Seattle, but he was moving out of the Bay Area. And Matt McElwain and I met with Jeff, and, he had this really neat, it's like single line of code, and you put it on a page. And there was no mobile app. I mean, this, almost maybe didn't predate the iPhone, but it certainly predated the App Store. And so this is about, embedding like telephony into web pages and, hey, customer service or, whatever. You can imagine some uses for that. And it's one line of code, and everything on the back end is really complicated, and we simplify everything. And it was very AWS-y, right? And Jeff is a tremendous, kind of person. And the two reasons we passed, but I think we had full opportunity. I mean, Jeff could probably say different, but I think we personal chemistry and otherwise. One is the company. He's moving the company out of the Bay Area, and I think we were we generally invested in companies based in Seattle, but that wasn't the driving factor. We weren't sure about whether the kind of bottoms up developer oriented sales model and like going to conferences and kind of selling that way would be a way to scale the business. And that was 100% wrong.
I actually have that on here as a question. Like, which investment opportunity did you pass up that you regret? Twilio makes sense. So speaking of that, so you're talking a little bit, giving us a little hint around like the lens that you use to assess. And we did talk about data. What role does like your gut play in how you make decisions?
I think it's sort of a gut feel and intuition about the entrepreneur, or a gut feel or intuition about what could happen in the future for a market that doesn't really exist. I think gut plays less of a role in things like, hey, they have customers and revenue, right? And so we can talk to customers. Or even if they don't have customers, we understand who the customer might be. And so we can go like to the extent that you can learn by speaking to people who have an informed point of view, we want to go do that as much as we can. Gut is certainly a big factor around people, right? I mean, it's like any close relationship. I mean, if you're going to be on somebody's board, it's going to be a 5 to 10 year journey in all likelihood. And so how well do you know each other? One of the things I'd prefer to do if possible is get to know somebody long before, we're writing a check and to build that relationship, partly because, then hopefully we have a better chance of winning because we can demonstrate our value, but also because, it's not like you get married after the first date kind of thing, and in other types of relationships. And so, once you write the check and you join the board, it's sort of, you're in it for a while.
It's hard to undo that. Yeah.
Yeah. How many trust and empathy and
How many current investments do you have in the portfolio, and which companies are you most excited about?
I'm not going to answer that.
That's like,
which is my favorite, child. No, I mean, it's every new investment you make is kind of an exciting, hey, there's a newness element to it, but it doesn't make the more legacy investments less interesting. I'll actually mention a company that, may sound counterintuitive, and because it's an older company in our portfolio, and two, it's a company that really got smashed by COVID. It's a company called Peach. I think you had Nishan on.
Yeah, I love Nishan.
One of your,
He's awesome.
Yeah. So broadly speaking, in sort of the food delivery space, and but really in aggregating demand in the context of offices. Well, you couldn't be in a worse, category than that when COVID hits, nobody's going back to the office, et cetera. And I don't want to, I'm not going to mention, and I don't know if he did on the podcast, but I'm not going to talk about the kind of new product he's launching, which is, directly related, but I'd say slightly adjacent. And he and I were talking yesterday, and this is a company that's, they've been through the ringer, just to be clear. And I cannot be more excited about the what they're building right now, and I think it's be massive.
I'm going to call him
far larger than where he was able to build prior to COVID, the first business. And so it's not always about who's raised the most money, or I mean, we've got lots of great stories about small to big, and those are great too. But the near misses that turn into something really exciting. I mean, that's to me is like the best.
Exciting
story.
Oh yeah, that's a warm, fuzzy, good story. So speaking of the pandemic, I actually was curious, like, what surprised you during the pandemic? Because I know those early days when I was having conversations, even with people in your industry, saying kind of like we thought it was going to be a shorter period of time. So them kind of being like, we're going to hold on. We haven't met, we're not going to invest in companies where we haven't like spent a lot of time and met the entrepreneurs, and especially in person. And that kind of was like thrown out the window. All sorts of money was thrown in during the pandemic. We got busier than we've ever been, times like 1,000. And it was because all sorts of money was being put to use, but people didn't think that was going to happen.
Yeah.
So how did it impact kind of what you thought was going to happen, and how's it different?
Yeah. Well, I think there's sort of two different lenses I used as it relates to our venture business. One is, are we going to make investments in companies and entrepreneurs we've never met physically in person? And as you said, I don't think we ever said we wouldn't. And certainly many of the first half of 2020 investments we made were people we'd met prior to the pandemic in person. But yeah, I probably wouldn't have predicted that our pace of investing would have been as, as hot as it was. But I think part of that is because I wouldn't have predicted that certain segments of, of industry, certainly technology, would accelerate in the way that they did. Q2 of 2020 was sort of a tough quarter for almost every company, independent of what you were doing, maybe with the exception of Zoom, because if you're selling enterprise software,
like Zoom and Slack, they're great.
Yeah, I mean, a few notable exceptions, but Q2, everybody with their budgets was like, oh gosh, I don't know what's going to happen here, so I'm just not going to write a check. I'm not going to buy that piece of software, and so everybody had a crappy Q2. But then in Q3, this is probably going to be a while, and the working from home thing works, and so in the technology sector, people's productivity is driven by their ability to use technology. And so everybody's working from home. Well, guess what? Technology and software is that much more important. And so in Q3, Q4, those things came back, right? And so and have continued to do so through the pandemic. And so, at least in our industry, say, well, gosh, that's creating new opportunities, future of work. Are we going to be in mostly hybrid, work context? Okay, well, that creates a whole new set of challenges around collaboration, which software and technology can help address, right? And so I think there's a bunch of plenty that have not, right? But as it relates to our investing, that you would be foolish to not write checks into great companies because you hadn't met in person.
Yeah.
And fortunately, as we sit here today, we're starting to meet people again in person, and I still think that personal touch is important.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. So during the pandemic, tell me, like, you got a dog, and did you also start this? Tell me about this garage that you started. I know you're like a car guy, but tell me about this garage. How did you come up with the idea for your recent endeavor?
I like the beauty. Aesthetically, I enjoy like old cars. I just think there's something about
old school.
This is not a great analogy, but I compare it to movies. Every movie, with some notable exceptions, but pretty much every movie's ever been made. Like, they've already been made, and now it's just a question of like, what's the variation that somebody's going to bring? It's like an old trope, but they're going to put it, into some new, just based on a formula that somebody else came up with. And I kind of feel like that's what happens with cars. There's new technology and there's new, but from a design aesthetic, and there's sort of this kind of sad, wasteful component of how people use cars, right? Because you've got all this sheet metals, all this work that goes into making these things. They're perfectly great. They just kind of need new drivetrain, things to make them safe and modern. But there's no reason to throw away, all this work and effort and energy to put into the old ones. And so I like new cars too. I'm sort of a car, I'm into cars, but I really like old ones. And I really, what resonates with me is the opportunity to be beautiful and work just great. They're just old and need a new engine, or they need a new suspension.
They need like a little zhuzh.
Yeah. And so that's kind of something that's really fun and interesting and exciting. And so I have a really great guy who runs it, and it's kind of just getting off the ground. And so, I'll go over there on the weekends or a Friday night, and, he can teach me how to weld or, do things with my hands. But, it's called Scoville Motor Works. And I'd spell that for you, but nobody needs to know. It's really only my friends at this point who are sort of customers. We haven't really, we have a lot going on, but it's pretty much all people that are close. And so at some point, as we start churning out product, we'll probably have a broader aperture, but it's kind of surprising how many, I don't know if it's like nostalgia or whatever it is, but like how many people are really into, this thing that my dad drove when he was, when I was a kid, or gosh, I had a poster of X on my wall. Actually, 3 of our clients are women. It's not a guy or gal thing.
Yeah, it's like a car person thing.
Lots of people have passion for that.
Yeah.
I'm actually started, and it's very much a crawl, walk, run thing, but electrifying old vehicles to me is sort of a really neat opportunity. We're not, we're just getting started on, figuring out how to do, vanilla, but that's another thing I'm super passionate about, because I think that is the future. But there's no reason you can't do it in this beautiful old.
Yeah.
Old
and
car.
So if there's a car that you would invest in right now, as far as like a long-term investment.
So I do think, these are scarce assets. I mean, you'd be shocked at baseball cards as an example, and how much those are. So I think if you just talk about collectibles broadly, there's something, and I do think this was accelerated by the pandemic, partly relation that hasn't been spending money on this or that. And they say, hey, what's something I'm passionate about? And maybe they're going a little crazy.
Or they have time. They have time to think about it, or watch like James Bond movies and like fantasize.
Yeah.
Is there a dream car for you? Like you're like, oh my gosh, if I ever could get this car.
There is, but I'm not going to answer that one. But I'll tell you, the car that I'm building for myself right now is it's called a International Harvester. So the tractors. International Harvester, or maybe you don't, but that's a tractor company. And in the 70s, they built a model called the Scout. And so we're building, for me, an International Harvester, 1975 International Harvester Scout 2.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look it up.
And it might look like an old Bronco or a Blazer, that type of thing. But I love kind of like these old. They're beautiful.
Yeah, I'm gonna be on the lookout for you. So tell me, so you're there on the weekends, and what else are you liking to do kind of on a random Saturday? And then of course on Sunday, when you get yourself ready for the week, how do you set yourself up to kind of balance it all?
It's so different from what I do. So when you think about, in my day job, and, and I love technology and thinking about that stuff, but it's also fun just to, not have, to not do that. I talked about like reading, science sling and wrenches, which I'm not good at, but, getting to sort of look at, how does this work? How does an engine work? What are, bushings, all that, just things that have nothing to do with anything I've ever known before. That's a great, I don't know if palate cleanser is the right term, but it just sort of like helps, kind of reset my brain a little bit. But it's honestly that is kind of the new project, and then my family. That's really
the priorities. And what about as far as rituals like this, or like just how you set yourself up? Is even any hacks like, I use this app for this or this?
I don't know. I'm not as my wife would tell you, like I'm not the most organized person, but I'm fairly punctual, and it's a lot of it's in my head, and I'm sure at some point, as I deteriorate in my old age, that will become a challenge and a flaw. But I don't use a lot of productivity hacks. One thing I've really enjoyed. I've got we're investors in a company called Trade Coffee, which is like a really high quality, like a craft coffee kind of membership club, and that's become a fun kind of ritual for me in the morning. It's just making like a really nice cup of coffee, and it's an opportunity to hang out in the kitchen with the boys while they're getting ready for school. But it's also sort of like, I like things that take a little time, but then it's sort of like worth the payoff.
Yeah. And what are you doing for workouts these days?
So I maybe at some point, we, like many, put a Peloton in the basement when COVID hit. I really enjoyed running, and you and I live on the same island, and, running is fun there because, there's a lot of elevation change. Like it's a good workout.
Yeah.
It's hard to do at this time of year because, even when I left the house today at whatever it was, 8:15, it was not, particularly bright out. And so running at, 6:15, which is what I would need to do to sort of be able to help out in the morning, all that. Yeah. It's not fun and it's wet, but running is kind of my jam. I have a friend that I run with, Dave Glick, who you had on your podcast on the
Oh yeah,
South
I
End of
saw
the
you
Howard every
guys running.
Saturday
That's
morning.
right. That's right. That's awesome.
So it's fun. I really like to do that. I do like the boot camp thing and Orange Theory and all that sort of stuff too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Peloton boot camp rocks. It's like
Yeah.
it's a really good workout. Anyway, okay. So my final question for you is, what fuels you?
I would say curiosity. I mean that I sort of talked about lifelong learning, but it's I get energy in finding new things and learning about new things, and I think you have to have that curiosity to enjoy that. And so that's where I get my energy. I'm a continuous learner. I always want to come up to speed on something, imagine what the future could be, and that's it.